What I'm going to talk about is a new way or a new strategy for looking at STEM education, but also innovative problem solving. And I'm going to draw from my experiences at NASA, what led me to this. And so the objectives are to help revolutionize STEM education, because I think the revolution is actually happening right now. Okay, and we're going to be seeing it, and I'm going to talk about it. Revolutionize the conceptual design portion of the design process, where the innovation has to happen, and it's very important to do it there. Okay, and what I see, what are the problems that we have right now? What are some of the problems? And one of them is the US World Rankings, STEM rankings, and the dropout rate of students. The other one is the conceptual design phase, I think, is broken in a lot of companies, as well as in some divisions and centers at NASA, and I'll explain why. And then I'll talk a little bit about what my ideas are on this, on innovation, and how to possibly change this in the work that I've been doing. You know, the problem, when you look at it, the United States, this is a great infographic, has almost $1 trillion in education each year. So it's number one in spending per student. Literacy rate, we're number 3 out of these 12 countries. Life expectancy, we're 5. But yet when it comes to the math and the science scores, we're 9th and 10th. Okay? But we're throwing more money at the problem than any other country. Okay? This was an article in the New York Times. I don't know if you saw this, but 40% of the students planning on entering engineering drop out, or change their majors or drop out. And this was in the New York Times, and then Michael Chang basically said, we're losing students at an alarming rate, but it's not that we're losing students that aren't interested or good at STEM. We're losing some of the best students that are competent in the STEM subjects. Okay, so why is that? You know, why is that? Why are we losing these kids that have this ability in STEM? They go in their first year and we lose them. Okay, I have some thoughts on that. Why are so many? The other thing that I think about, because I have teenagers, is why are kids opting out of reality and jumping into virtual reality and gaming? Okay? And so there's a great book by Jane McGonigal, Reality is Broken. And what she says is, and this is phenomenal, when I read this book, I couldn't believe it. In today's society, computers and video games are fulfilling genuine human needs that the real world is currently unable to satisfy. Can you imagine that? The virtual world is fulfilling genuine human needs, okay? They are bringing us together in ways that reality is not. That's amazing. And when I look at this, I look at the world we live in, and we have so many real epic, what I call epic challenges, and what Jane McGonigal would call epic challenges. Why are we opting out to play games, okay? But I'm taking another look at that. I'm trying to figure out not only why is reality broken, but what can we learn from this new breed of student, if you will, our kids. They learn differently, they're motivated differently, possibly, and they have different skills. But these skills that they have are phenomenal. When you see kids play these massively multiplayer online games, they're connecting socially with kids all over the world. And they're solving virtual reality challenges real time. And they're developing these phenomenal virtual skills at connecting. And that's what we need to learn from. How do these kids do this? Talked a little bit about it's about the motivation. And you heard it from the previous speaker. The kids are not motivated by extrinsic rewards. It's the intrinsic rewards, leveling up in a game. Having a certain badge or recognition means something, okay? It's competition versus collaboration. You know, what I'm proposing is a collaborative effort as opposed to a competition, okay, where you're linking these kids together for the greater good. And it's also how they're rewarded, what kind of recognition and status they're given, okay? So what can we learn from this? Kareem Lakhani at Harvard Business School, looking at open source science, had this quote: "In fact, the strongest correlate between time spent on a project and other factors was how a person assessed the creativity in the project. If they felt they could express their creativity, they were more prone to do it." Okay? They spent more time together. And that completely jives with what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote in his book Flow and Creativity, the psychology of invention and discovery. Creativity is the central source of meaning in our lives. Most of the things that are interesting and important and human are results of creativity. And I love this last part. When we are involved in it, we feel we are living more fully than any other time during the rest of our lives. And I've witnessed this. I've worked on lots of joint programs with every NASA center, almost every branch of the Department of Defense, and almost every aerospace company and subcontractor in the United States. And what I see, even the people that work for me, is that if you give them a project and you make it epic, and they work on it, as part of a team, you see a total turnaround in those people. I've seen people basically checking marks on a wall in their NASA office, days to retirement, like prisoners of war when they're going to get out, or prisoners in jail, and completely turned around by this. So I watched this. And if you read a book called Organizing Genius by Warren Bennis, he talks about these great groups and what makes these people great groups, like the Disney Troupe, the Skunk Works, the Manhattan Project. What makes these people want to do what they do and feel like they're greater than, doing something that's greater than themselves? And then something else that was mentioned was that the schools kill creativity. And so this was another article in that teachers don't like creative students. And I read this article, and basically it says one of the most consistent findings is that teachers don't like students that are creative. Students that challenge, that are critical thinkers, that are constantly asking questions. And Torrance, who's really a world-renowned expert on creativity and innovation, described creative people as not only having the time not having the time to be courteous, as refusing to take no for an answer, and as being negativistic and critical of others. Other characteristics, although not deserving the label obnoxious. And they're the ones that are punished in the classroom. So if my mother was alive today, I would say, you know what, Ma, this is why the nuns and the brothers had me in detention, had me in the cloakroom. This is why, because I was creative. But you know, there's another great, I don't know if anyone has seen this on YouTube, this video. It's a TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson. Has anyone seen this? You got to go there. He's funny, but he's brilliant. He was led the education system in the UK, and it's all about why schools kill creativity. We drive it out of them. The most creative students are the ones in the youngest grades, and it continues to get worse. Another chart that I found that was very interesting, Melanie Dumas in 2010 gave this presentation. She was a program manager at DARPA, trying to turn the tide of computer science and STEM education, because DARPA recognized that we would need people with these skills, and we are not going to have them. And so she put this slide up. And when I saw this slide, there are thousands of programs out there. And this just speaks to the first slide that I had up there on how the U.S. is spending a ton of money. There are tons of programs out there. But where are the linkages? Okay? Where's the connectivity? Where's the path that says, once we excite these students, how do we put them on a track that says, okay, this is the path you take, this is the knowledge you have to gain, and oh, by the way, can't we do that? And I'll talk about other ways we could do that and have these students learn these skills, get recognized for these skills online by themselves. So these are some of my overarching ideas, okay? I believe that students and people in general love to solve problems. And they love to, and the more epic the problem, the more challenging the problem, that is the hook that grabs these kids. Now, it might not be for all kids, but I think that's important. Kids can determine when a problem is real and when it's not real. I believe there's a stone soup, to quote a phrase from the children's fable, of expertise willing to help, and it's not going to cost millions of dollars in NSF research grants on education to do this. How many people know about the Khan Academy? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but he's starting that revolution. People are finally realizing he's just going out and doing it, okay? And he's analyzing what he's done, and it's phenomenal that these kids go online and what they do. I believe creativity is a team sport, and there are lots of articles on this and books on this, and that myth of the lone innovator is really a great story, a great myth, but it really takes a team. Kids love to work together in teams. Teachers don't love for students to work together in teams because it's very hard to differentiate as to who did what, where the contributions were. But now, with things like the Khan Academy, when you're recording this, when what they're doing is they're doing it online, we could make those differentiations. The teachers could look at a dashboard, and I'll show you this, and they could figure out where the contributions are coming from, where the innovation is coming from, and grade the students accordingly based on creativity, communication skills, knowledge. I believe we could use open source science to solve very innovative, epic challenges by pulling people together and reaching out in a wisdom of the crowds, collaborative kind of approach. Okay, so this was that chart from Melanie Dumas, and these are the issues that we have. Where is the repository for information, for collected knowledge that the students have? Where can they store that so that they know? Where can they get recognized? How do you measure? What are the metrics that are being used to figure out which of these programs is really working? Okay, what metrics are we going to use to systematically analyze performance and gain from lessons learned on why the good techniques are working? Continuity. Where's the continuity in these programs from kids from elementary school all the way up to graduate school, that they can follow the path and they scaffold that knowledge that they're learning? Okay, and sustainability. How do we make it affordable and sustainable so that we don't have to keep knocking on NASA's door or the NSF for these multi-million-dollar grants that go, a lot of it, into education research? Not that that's not important. Okay, here are my some of my ideas on how to do this. I'm going to, what I've been doing is I start with an epic challenge. Pick a tremendously complex, multidisciplinary problem, okay? And work down from graduate school to elementary school, okay? Basically, functionally decomposing that problem into systems and subsystems, eventually into engineering classes at the different engineering disciplines in the different departments at the university level, okay? And show the interrelationships between why these courses are important. Why do you need electrical engineering? Why do you need to know material science? Why do you need to know structures in the solution of this process? And basically take that step by step back down to high school and link it with things like the Khan Academy so kids could see that clear path. And that's basically, and teach them how to solve the problem. Show them the linkages in the skills that they're acquiring and why it's important. I firmly believe that the reason why those kids are dropping out in freshman year is exactly the same reason. And I have a daughter at Ohio State, a stepdaughter at Ohio State. They get into a field that they love, they have a passion for. And then they're hit with these really tough courses, partial differential equations, chemistry, and they struggle with this because they don't see the connection between that very difficult course and their passion. We need to make that link between their passion and that course very clear so that they can relate to it. They know what they're struggling, why they're struggling, because they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. They know what they're going to gain by doing that. We need to recognize and reward the skills that are mastered. One of the things that gaming people do, and the reason why they hook people, is they have these great behavioral sciences that spend billions of dollars. That's $1 billion industry. And they spend this money hooking these kids on the game. And one of the ways they do it is by the intrinsic rewards. Okay? We could develop intrinsic reward systems, and that's what the Khan Academy does. As you master skills, you're given badges. Simple things like that. How many of you are old enough, like I am, that remember SRA, reading, when you were in school? Do you remember that? I had to Google it because I forgot what it was. The nuns used to do that. The reading comprehension, they had different colors, right? You used to go up there, you used to check the thing out. That was the analog of gaming and leveling up. It was what we were doing then. But it worked. You know, you were trying to improve your own skills, but you also knew where you stood in relationship to everyone else. But you did it at your own pace. We're going to link not only the students, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do this. We're going to link we're going to link the graduate students to the undergraduate students, to the teacher coaches in the high schools, to the high school students, to middle school students, together with experts in the field at NASA, industry, and academia around the country. We're going to create an environment where the teachers have a place to go to get content from the experts, and a safe place to go in order to ask questions and to help create courses to make their job interesting. And then we're going to do this, and we're going to keep doing it. So I'm going to show you how we do this. I'm going to show you a couple of ways that I've tried it. Right now I'm going to be working with MIT, Penn State, Georgia Tech, and University of Houston. It starts with the challenge. And so you could look at this as a model that the government puts out the challenge. I happen to work for NASA. We did this last year with the Air Force and NASA. They have an epic challenge that they could propose. On the commercial side, if you're in industry, you could think about, you know what? And when I did a detail at NYU Poly, and I had several folks from the energy companies come and say, you know what, we need a pipeline of students going into the energy companies. And you know, so at the very top, you could look at this as whoever it is underwrites the program, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, okay? And what that does is they pose the challenge. And then what I will show you is by using this analogy and doing this through NASA, we have all the experts there that can help the teachers develop the curriculum to do this, okay? And what you will end up getting is a set of courses that if kids are interested in whatever the subject is, underwater drilling, power companies, you will be creating a pipeline and generating interest in that field. All you have to do is come up with the epic challenge, and we can work with you on that, on how to do that, because gamers know how to do this. If you get game designers in the mix, that happens automatically. You come up with an epic challenge. We picked one. The one we're going to do this year is Mars habitat. But we're not just going to do a Mars habitat, because anyone could do a Mars habitat. We are going to look at the most challenging aspects of a Mars habitat that NASA hasn't been able to solve in 50 years. How do you solve the radiation problem? Number one. And number two, I'm picking two this time. I like to overextend myself, but then you'll see why. I'm an ADHD adult, so work with me on this. We're going to pick two. The second one is going to be a fully sustainable, robust, fully closed cycle environmental control system. Two of the things that are out there, the long poles in the tent. We're collecting the subject matter experts in radiation from around the country, okay? And they're and at NASA, and they're working with us. Went out and shopped around, and we're going to be, MIT is going to be leading it, and I know we're going to do it right this time. And not that the other times we didn't do it right, we learned a lot, University of Houston, Georgia Tech, Penn State. It starts with the subject matter experts and the challenge. We pick universities with the graduate students that are interested in some very critical part of that problem. And we are going to get those graduate students to collaborate and work together as a team, together with undergraduates from those universities, okay? And those are the graduate students, and the undergraduates will typically be looking at these challenges as things they could potentially work on in their senior year for capstone design, okay? You with me? Okay, now we form a cohort group where basically these points of contact, these leaders at these universities that are working this, have a place to discuss ideas on how to make this work. What works in one university might not work at another university. You have an urban university where kids get easy to travel, public transportation, might not work at a rural university. And then we link these great graduate students and undergraduate students to the teacher coaches at what I'm calling hub high schools. So we have a hub university at MIT where we have several hub high schools in that area, okay? And these high school teachers will be coming up to MIT for an intensive one-week seminar where we're going to train them. And then we're not only going to train them, we're going to teach them how to teach engineering and how to solve problems at the high school level, okay? And they will be connected and have their own cohort group where they can discuss ideas and challenges, which will be linked to at the university level and also dropping down to the middle school level. That's basically, and what we're trying to do is form this continuum of mentorship. Think the metaphor I like to use is like the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. We're going to give merit badges, if you will, as students master certain skills. They're not punished by grades. They're rewarded for what they master. They can take their time to do it. But what I've seen and what you will see is that the graduate students are natural mentors for the undergrads and right on down the line. Students learn this way, okay? So, it starts with the challenge. How do you make it epic? I like to pick something that's never been done before, almost impossible. If it isn't impossible, you could make it impossible by how you constrain the problem. You can still, in a sense of urgency or criticality, time constraints, budget constraints, you make the problem as challenging. And this is where the game designers come in. Look for the high-risk, high-payoff ideas to drive out those breakthrough ideas. And if the project isn't a mission from God, you can make it so. And these are lines straight from Organizing Genius. And if there isn't an enemy or a competitor or a challenger, you can create one, okay? And that's kind of what Steve Jobs does. So it's us against them kind of thing. It's David and Goliath, and I'll show you how that works. Well, you know, we had a great epic challenge. It was the Apollo program, right? And look what that did for education. But that was a unique example. I mean, all the planets aligned for that, right? We had those no-good communists. So it was national, it was political, it was, and what that did was it created doubled the graduate rate, upped the patents, the innovation in the country, and what that did, as you heard from the previous speaker, was it created a better economy. But we tossed a lot of money at this problem. Okay, that's one example. I've been around a long time, so I worked on some really challenging problems. This is one of them. And many of the folks here in the room that are from the Air Force remember this, right? What is this? The aerospace plane, remember that? This was probably more of an epic challenge than going to the moon. Would you agree, Rob? We didn't quite get there, but it was an epic challenge. Another project I worked on was single stage to orbit. We were going to take the entire vehicle up to orbit in one fell swoop with the tanks, not drop off anything, and then we were going to bring it back home, and then we were going to reuse it. We didn't quite get there. But look at this program. Look at all the different companies we worked with around the country, and what was amazing was we shared ideas across those companies. Those companies also paid money to play, so it's part of that stone soup that they would pay to participate. We also had this open forum where we were evaluating their ideas, but you know what? As a government employee, I could submit an idea that would be evaluated by the contractors, and we would try to pick the best ideas. It was a phenomenal program. Now, how do we do this virtually? How do we create a virtual skunkworks, make the magic happen, and accelerate the process? It's also about the environment, okay? And so you heard about that in the previous presentation. How do you create an environment where innovation can flourish? You know, you have the idea of a lone innovator, you have singers and dancers, but what you want to do is create an environment where singers and dancers can flourish. And you do that by making it psychologically safe. It's okay to dissent, it's okay to question the teacher, it's okay to make mistakes. As a matter of fact, it's extremely important you make mistakes, because it's important that we learn from those mistakes, encourage risk-taking, make it as stimulating an environment as possible, stimulating all the senses, sight, sound, touch, feel. And this is what we did at Penn State. So we want to create this ecosystem where problem solving and solving epic problem solvers can flourish, okay? So this was an article, a professor that I worked with when I was at NYU Poly. She wrote an article in Harvard Business Review, and it's Who Moved My Cube, okay? And in there she's drawing on analogies between physical spaces for collaboration, like you see Google, and they make it a great little place, and where those interactions happen, with a virtual space. How do you create that same virtual collaborative space so that people want to use it? How do you, and you could design it so that you have proximity, privacy, and permission, so that basically you can connect or have random interactions, not so random, but occur more frequently at disciplines that might be more closely coupled. But you still want to throw some random ideas out there. How do you create that environment in a virtual space, like a water cooler or a boardroom where anyone could enter? And how do you assure that when they enter it, it's private, right? When you think about it, all your emails are out there and anyone could look at them. Wouldn't it be great to have a virtual office where, you know, you go down the room, you talk to someone that you rely on, that's a good person to test your ideas on. You know that when you leave that room, the conversation vaporizes, right? It doesn't go anyplace else. And so you have that, that assurance, that freedom that you could do things like that. What was amazing was when I had students, I told them, you know what, I want you to make mistakes. You go online, I want to see, you can have all these interactions. Don't worry if you make mistakes. I go on this virtual platform and I look and I don't see any activity. What was happening? The students didn't believe me. They were using AIM, they were using other things other than the virtual platform I gave them, because even though I told them you don't have to worry about it, Charlie Kamada wants you to fail, they didn't quite believe me, you know? And that's the same reason why a lot of engineers, well, they didn't believe me, okay? They didn't want to look foolish. So a lot of times you have these type A students that are all about their grades, all about looking good. They're brilliant. They don't want to look bad. You have to be able to figure out how to make a safe environment where failure is okay. It's okay to look foolish, because that's where the creativity happens. We all know about engineering design. This was one of my mentors when I first started working at NASA Langley. You start with a concept. You go out there and you make a physical model of that concept and you do the analysis. Then you go out and you create an experiment. And then you do this dance between analysis and experiment until your analysis and experiment correlate. You test the failure, and if you could predict failure, that's fantastic. Once you understand it in your mind, or you think you know you understand the problem, then you use that analysis and you go into the design world. And then you use the computer for what the computer does. Grinds away in design space, trying to come up with an optimum design. And this is what you do. One of the things he never explained to me was, how do you come up with the concept? This is the magic. I've worked in each of these bubbles. I did work in mathematical programming, and I went to my advisor, Rafi Hofker at University of Florida in Gainesville, and he said, Charlie, I'm not creative. And I thought he was the most creative person. He said, I'm not creative, but I think he does creative stuff. He said, because he doesn't come up with the concept. If you give me the concept, I can optimize it. And so I think the concept is king. And so that's what we try to teach. I teach a course called Innovative Conceptual Engineering Design, and we focus on the fuzzy front end. And the reason for that, and NASA doesn't get it in some cases, and a lot of industry doesn't get it, you get the most leverage by a great concept. Early in the design cycle, you can invest 1% of your time. Usually companies only spend about 1% of their resources in the conceptual design phase. They immediately think they got to go down select to one design, but what happens is once you pick that design, you're stuck with about 70% of the life cycle cost, and you might not be able to overcome some of the problems, okay? So, what I did was I developed this methodology. It looks very similar to other design types of methodologies. You start with the problem definition phase, the problem immersion phase. We take those experts, we totally immerse the students in the problem, we teach them how to research the problem, and we want them to constantly be thinking about the problem. Because it's an epic problem, it's important. We want them to learn how to do this so that when they leave the classroom, that problem is constantly rolling like a videotape in the front of the back of their mind in the subconscious, so that they're always prepared as they go out in the real world and they're on a bus or they're on a plane, they're thinking about their problem, they're watching the world around them, and the solution will come to that prepared mind. Or an idea will come to that prepared mind. We teach them how to work together in teams. Matter of fact, when we select these students, we group them together based on surveys to try to look to get an optimum, each of them to be optimum performing, successful teams. You want the kids that think outside the box. You don't want all engineers. That's the wisdom of crowds, right? You don't want to do that because your solution space will be that much more constrained. Okay? You want those out-of-the-box thinkers in there. You want designers in there. You want artisans in there. You want people that think with different styles, different learning styles, visual, kinesthetic, mathematical on the team. So there's a process for doing that. And then encourage creativity. This is a very large box where you have lots of different tools to do this. And you heard of a couple of them from the previous speaker. What I use a lot is biologically inspired design. We have Dr. Jeanette Yen from the Center for Biologically Inspired Design at Georgia Tech. She'll come and she'll make connections between the problem that we're working, trying to draw analogies from nature so that the students can understand how do those little critters do what they do and work their magic to solve a problem that's almost similar or similar in different ways. And then how can we learn from those mechanisms that they use and bring them to solve the problem? We have a whole box full of different techniques to use. They're just tools to help us think differently, okay? It's like a coach. You use different tools and different styles for different kids. And then we get them to go through a concept ideation phase, they go through an evaluation phase, and then we want them to build things. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the idea lab, the discovery lab, but we want them to go out there in the lab. We want them to analyze, design, prototype, build, test, and fail fast and furiously. We want to show people that you could design this so that you can have intelligent, fast failures as opposed to slow, stupid failures, so that we're learning fast and furiously. Okay, So we take a typical building block approach, just like all engineers do, and this is an example I used when we were coming up with an idea for that reusable single-stage to orbit vehicle. Well, the great idea we had was, why don't you have an evacuated honeycomb core sandwich panel so that you evacuate it. It's almost like a thermos bottle on the ground, and so your structure is multifunctional. It's a good insulator, it's a good vacuum, but it's also a good structure. And then we look at what's the building block approach you take in order to understand what the critical failure mechanisms are. And you teach students and engineers, when you have an idea, it's just like an artist, when you have an idea or a design, you have to be able to look at that objectively and be totally objectively critical of your own ideas. You know how hard that is for a lot of inventors and a lot of creative people? But you know, my grandfather was a tailor, and I can remember as a little kid I'd have these great hand-sewn Italian suits, but I used to sit there and this bald man with pins in his mouth would be ripping the arms off of my jacket because it wasn't perfect. You look at what artists do, they look for that perfection. They're critical. Leonardo da Vinci looked at things every different way. If you go outside Florence from the great museums, you'll see lots of mistakes that were made in the process of making a David, okay? Okay, and then you go to eventually to a final design. But along this building block approach, you're teaching students how to use simplified analysis and simplified tests to mimic the real world and to design those tests to be intelligent, to learn the most that you can from them. And that's what we call intelligent fast failure. Okay, I told you I worked on single stage to orbit vehicle. I'm not going to mention any names, but Lockheed Martin had the leadership in this, okay? And they missed a critical failure mechanism in that design for that honeycomb sandwich. You know, and I went there, and this is when I just became an astronaut. I flew there, and I'm looking at this design, and the lead there, I'm not going to mention any names, Paul Landry, said to me, he said, Charlie, he said, this is your idea. I said, no, this isn't my idea. You need to evacuate that honeycomb. He said, no, we don't. I said, yeah, you need to evacuate it. Otherwise, you will get cryo-pumping of air in there, or you will get liquid hydrogen leaking in there. And once the vehicle takes off, that honeycomb will explode. 3 years, I'm sitting at my desk training to be an astronaut, hoping to fly. I look at Aviation Week, and there in Aviation Week is a picture of this huge tank that they made with the honeycomb blown apart. Call him up on the phone, leave this nasty message. He never returned my phone call, Paul Landry. Nor did the head from NASA. But what happened? That great program that had a chance was destroyed. They could have learned that that was a problem. And we had in our sub-test, the test that we were going to do, in that sub-scale test, specimens this big that would have identified that as a critical problem. So in the sequence of your normal product design chart, the ICE process is right here. And this is an MIT chart. I'm working with the folks from MIT. And what we're trying to do this summer is we're trying to bring in students and graduate students around the country so that we have this very rich creative pool of ideas, okay? And we're going to link these kids together in the virtual world to do that. Where did this come from? Where did I get this great idea? Well, it happened after the Columbia tragedy. Okay, everyone remembers the Columbia tragedy, right? You know, I was actually on the flight that flew right after the accident, but I wasn't assigned to the flight. I told my boss, I really want to work with these teams around the country to figure out what went wrong and to figure out how to fix it. And I had a great time, and we did great things. But basically, this is a picture of the Columbia tragedy. Mission Control. Mission management team on the ground is looking at this footage. They're trying to figure out, can that cause a problem? Did that damage the wing leading edge? It was the largest piece of foam anyone had ever seen strike the vehicle, and it definitely strikes the vehicle, right? And it hits it in absolutely the worst location. wing leading edge panels 9 and 10, where you have a shock-shock interaction heating, and the temperatures there are about 3,000 degrees. And we all know what the people on the ground did. Really smart people made a very bad decision. They never tested anything. They never, well, the analysis they used was 400 times. They extrapolated from their curve fit 400 times, and they said, you know what, that won't be a problem. And we all know what happened. It was tragic when the astronauts came back, that the vehicle broke apart over southeast Houston, southeast Texas. So after the accident, we lost 7 crew members. Somebody finally says, I think it was the foam. Here's what we need to do. And this is what I call a slow, stupid test, because it took a long time to develop. It took about 3 to 6 months. Going to shoot a very large piece of foam, about 1.67 pounds, at real wing leading edge panels. This is about a $20 million test. So the crew on orbit were never told. They were actually, eventually they had to be told that, yeah, you might get a question from the press about foam that came off, but it's not a problem. All right? And so real engineers that looked at this said there's no way that that could cause a problem. Okay? So now, you think this is an epic challenge, right? How do we fix something like that, right? And we had teams from Boeing, Thiokol, Lockheed struggling over how to do this for a year. And I'm watching them and I'm saying, you know what? Put me in, coach. Put me in. Let me go and get the same great people that I know around the country to make a small team to figure out how to do this. And we did it. And we went in my buddy's garage, good old Don Pettit, who's up on orbit right now. He's the ultimate geek. I don't even come close to being as geeky as my buddy Don. But he had a garage laboratory that we could go in, because this was an area I knew something about, and I had contacts with people from around the world, and I wanted it outside of Johnson Space Center because I didn't want anyone to know we were doing it, because we wouldn't have been able to accomplish what we did as quick as we did. But it was an environment that was psychologically safe because it was covert, okay? No one knew about it. We were connected because all the really good people in those companies that were told not to work with me were working with me and were sending me material to my door via UPS. Don't tell NASA this. Oh, this is being filmed. I forgot. I'm on camera. And so, you know, my wife was like on a first-name basis with the UPS guy. Sometimes she would say, Charlie, I think this is hazardous. And we would have all this material. We would go and I'd ask my wife, is it okay if I can go over and play with Don Pettit? I'd knock on his door. I'd ask Don Pettit's wife, Mickey Pettit, can Don come out and play? We'd go in his garage, and we would test these things. And we would fail like crazy. And every time we failed, we would have 5 ways to solve the problem. And we did this. And what we did was we looked at hundreds of ideas, and I had great people sending me material for free, by the way. This is the stone soup. So anything we could think of, we were having built in order to repair a wing leading edge, okay? And what was amazing was, since we've solved the wing problem, we started venturing into tile problems, since we were on a roll there, right? And we had this small team. It was great. And there he is. Look at him. Is he a geek or what? It's my buddy up in space. What we did was, one of the ideas we had, this was just one of them, we said, you know what? It takes about 1,800 of these patches, because they're stiff, to satisfy all the different curvatures on the wing leading edge. Plus they're thick and they tend to burn up when they're in an aerothermal environment. We said, why don't you just make it flexible? And oh, by the way, why don't you drill and tap a hole through this carbon-carbon wing and screw it in using a fastener made out of exactly the same material that the wing leading edge is made out of, only better, okay? And they told us it was impossible. It was impossible to drill through that wing leading edge. So this is me and Don Pettit in his garage. I happen to take a center punch, spring-loaded center punch, and guess what? That silicon carbide coating that's so hard, so tough you can't drill through it. Once you chip it, guess what? You could drill through it. Can you imagine PhDs were working on this with high-speed drills, high-torque drills, all different kinds of drill bits? We did this in a garage, okay? And we developed this drill bit. And I know nothing about tool making, but what we had the foresight to do was bring in someone that was an expert in tool making, an artisan, a craftsman from Langley, and added him to our team. And so when you need help, you expand your team a little bit, okay? And that's called a flexible core approach, okay? That's the concept. We did this in 2 months. We had a curved piece of a real section of a wing that JSC said it was impossible because they weren't going to give me any pieces of this material because they were in short supply. But I had one delivered to my house, and we demonstrated in front of these project managers how we were going to drill and tap and how we were going to screw this in using the exact same tools that the astronauts would use on orbit. And we ended up developing a whole system of tools. And we even came up with an idea that if you had that large pizza box size hole, we could fix it. This was with a small team in less than a year, okay? That's what you could do. The other thing, we talked about this extended network of experts. I just happen to be really good friends with the aerothermodynamics expert probably in the world, Pete Naffo. Okay, and I called him up and I said, you know what? Thiokol patches keep burning up right where this lip is, where the protuberance is to the flow. I said, Pete, could you make some runs in your CFD code and predict what that design has to look like? Because there was only a 200-degree margin. You know, once you exceeded 3,200 degrees, your idea basically burned up. Okay, so it went from 3,000 to 3,200. Pete Naffo made did the analysis in 1 day. And he said, if you make that lip less than 1/10 of an inch, the bevel angle less than 6 degrees, the ramp heating will not, and the protuberance heating will not over temperature your design. Immediately like that, we should be able to access experts around the world to help us solve these epic challenges. We could have been able to put that team together. We put a team together in 3 months. They were able to predict that large hole analytically. I believe we could have done that when the crew was in orbit. And so director of engineering, not director of engineering. I didn't get along well with upper management. I guess I was a little bit not politically correct, maybe. And so they said, why don't you go on and teach, Charlie? Why don't you go do something? Why don't you go teach young engineers how to do this? I said, okay, give me a problem. Give me a problem that you can't solve. And I went all over NASA. We came up with an alternate land landing problem. You know, the Orion capsule and the Apollo capsules, they plunk down in the ocean, right? There's a reason for that, because if they land on land, the crew gets seriously injured. Still haven't been able to solve that problem. I said, that's the problem. Let's solve that problem, okay? So, totally over-constrained problems, because our friends that were working this said, this is what the Orion capsule looks like. I only want you to work inside this capsule and just come up with a solution in there, yada, yada, yada. But I told my class, I said, you know what, that's great. If we could do it, great, but push back on those constraints. Because a lot of those requirements are in someone's mind. For instance, the eye height, the position of the crew, for instance. So the pilot and the co-pilot and the commander could see. Their eye point has to look out the window. So you can't shift the seating to give them a little extra stroke in that seat when they land to dampen out the acceleration. That's crazy, right? I mean, once the parachute is up there, there's not a whole lot of flying you're going to be doing. At least that's not what I think. So you don't need to be looking out the window. Anyway, we had 30 young NASA engineers from every NASA center. So you had multiple different cultures, not only researchers, but operations people, and also different disciplines. We went to Penn State. We did great things. One of those ideas was an airbag. And it was inspired by a biological system that protects the seeds. And this just shows how the students ideated, they sketched their ideas, they evolved their ideas. And what we did was, the NESC said, you know what, we're going to fund that idea. And so we took $135,000. We funded 2 universities, Penn State and MIT. And the result of that was this evolution of an airbag concept, and this was truly at Stone Soup that we sent them a crash test dummy from NASA Langley. The students got some funding internally. We were able to fund this project and also some capstone design projects. This is an actively damped strut. What was amazing was we got 2 universities to collaborate, and this is my graduate student that I'm working with right now from MIT, and he's also an Australian student, and he mentored these undergraduate students. So I've watched this magic happen, okay? I watch how he's mentored these students from different universities and what they were able to accomplish, okay? And what they accomplished was phenomenal. They did over 35 drop tests of this instrumented crash test dummy. They came up with a feasible solution to a problem that NASA hasn't been able to solve for 50 years, okay? And not only that, but the airbag design has the potential to save 26% mass over the original seat design, and it increases the habitable volume because it's stowable. And inside that small vehicle, that means a lot. So the magic can happen. The magic can work, starting from an epic challenge and letting students solve these problems. So, had experience teaching this to not only young NASA engineers, but also to grad students, undergrad students. When I was on a detail at NYU Poly for 2 years, we picked digging and drilling on the surface of the moon. I watched these fantastic students that were mentors, mentoring the younger students. Now they enter lunabotics competitions at KSC. Teams from NYU Poly would have never done that before. We looked at designing a spacesuit for Mars, and this gives you an idea of the number of high schools, and the numbers of students weren't that great, but we had a diverse group of kids from all around the New York, New Jersey area. The last project we worked on was designing an autonomous vehicle to look for lava tubes on the surface of Mars as a place for a potential habitat. Okay. So these are some of the ideas, for instance, that students came up with. And remember, this is only a 4 to 5 week program in the summer. And we're going to extend this, and I'll show you how. A young lady on one of the teams was looking at a design for an insulation for the spacesuit, biologically inspired design. She looked at polar bear hairs, wondering why do they do what they do so great, you know? And it's because they're hollow. And so she said, well, wow, somehow that helps the thermal insulative properties. And she combined it with an understanding that now we can create nanotubes of those kinds of dimensions. And so she was led down this path. Now, we didn't have enough time to totally take her down this path, but the next step would have been linking her up with a grad student to create analytical models, simulation tools for thermal analysis, so she could start playing in that design space. Because if the kids are not prepared yet to do the solution of partial differential equations, ordinary differential equations, we can at least give them modeling and simulation tools. And they could play with those parameters and have fun on the right side of their brain, being artists, looking at lots of different ideas, okay? And this was another idea that a student had for a spacesuit, where you use a cyber glove, because astronauts have a lot of fatigue using the gloves. They're pressurized gloves, the dexterity is terrible, and your hands are fatigued. They had this idea of, why not have this haptic glove connected to a robotic hand, if you will, just like we have on the robot in space right now, on the Robonaut up in space right now. And those same folks from that division at Johnson Space Center developed this robotic glove for General Motors to assist workers in a plant when they're grabbing things, so they're not damaging their hands, over long periods of time. Now, wouldn't it have been great to link those students with these experts at NASA teach them about robotics, have them come visit NASA either physically or virtually, and then have them link to see their ideas actually go into the marketplace, taking it that next step for entrepreneurship. Okay, so some of the ideas from an autonomous vehicle. This is where we teamed up with Rob Williams, and Rob isn't here today. He's my co-author, co-presenter, but he couldn't make it today. But we came up with this idea where we would collaborate, and we had the same structure. These were some of the ideas the students came up with, looking at what was done before, maybe making some combinations of ideas. This is the Discovery Lab, right in Dayton, Ohio. It's connected with the Wright Brothers Institute. And Rob and the folks there are doing some phenomenal work, and that's how we linked up. Joe Shabika, head of the Air Force Research Labs, put me in touch with Rob Williams, and the magic is happening there. He's providing an environment where these kids can explore, build, test their ideas, be very creative. They have a virtual component of that. So the students basically recreate their ideas in a virtual space and share their ideas. And these are things that get kids interested, gets them motivated to share ideas collaboratively, maybe anonymously using avatars and things like that, if they have some hesitation in doing this. And so when we looked at this lava tube idea, what Rob and his students did, they teamed up with, we had like 6 teams of students. They had only one team that they set aside to help us work on the lava tubes. They came up with a physical simulation of what a lava tube looks like. They looked at designing a robotic system that would traverse and go down into a lava tube, and they did that in Robot C. And they also created a virtual environment that simulated a lava tube. And I can't tell you stress enough about how that virtual environment helps the creative process. This is the project we're working on right now, designing a habitat for Mars. We're looking at using shipping containers to be functional representatives of units of the habitat. We're linking them to what we have at JSC, which is not near as mature as what we have at the Discovery Lab and Tech Edge at Dayton, Ohio. But the intent is the same, for us to have students there to build things and test things. Eventually, you might want to virtually design a system, analyze it functionally, all with the intent of the big picture looking at Mars, something. The work we did when I was in New York, New Jersey, is now spreading to high schools. So we have these great high school students and teachers looking at Mars, okay? And we're working with students from one of the top schools in Bergen County, and they're looking at solving problems related to Mars habitation. And so what we're doing is we're taking and we're giving them the content, we're helping them create the courses, and these great teachers at these high schools are basically selecting ideas like in situ resource utilization. So the teacher there teaching chemistry relates what those students are doing to a real problem, working with experts at NASA to create consumables that astronauts will need using elements on the surface or in the atmosphere of the planet. High altitude balloons, students are designing and launching a rig, trying to collect micrometeorites, potentially maybe bacteria, from the upper reaches of the atmosphere. Environmental control and biology, we're teaming them up with experts at NASA to look at what happens to water when it's on space station and how biofilm starts and forms, and how do you mitigate those problems. So I'm going to wrap up by saying I think the future of education is now. Okay, I don't know how many people have ever read this book, Disrupting Class. If you have kids, you should get this book. It's by Clayton Christensen. He teaches in Harvard Business School. He wrote several books on innovation, especially disruptive innovation. What's happening in the education system right now is really disruptive. What we're seeing with the Khan Academy is that basically, we're focusing on student-centric learning. Eventually, we will get to the point where the courses these kids learn online are geared towards their learning styles. Reverses the traditional role of teachers. You can go home and watch the videos. The kids learn, they take tests, they monitor where they are. It's self-paced, okay? And then when they come into the classroom, they can exercise what they learned. The teachers can monitor them on dashboards so that they can see where the student is stuck, provide guidance, and then those kids that might have been behind the rest of the class, and Khan is basically watching this, accelerates to the front of the class. Okay, this is what the Khan Academy looks like. I encourage you to go there if you have school-age children. Basically, every course you could think of at the high school level and above almost is there in these little modules, if you will. And once you master that module, you go to the next one. And what the Khan Academy does is he maps out what's necessary and how the student should progress from one subject to the next. He awards badges based on what they've mastered. And then this little graph on the right shows that when a student is stuck, like right here, with the right attention, that student, once you unstick them, maybe because they're just deep learners and they're thinking very hard or they didn't quite get this, as a good coach, a good teacher, you provide that assistance and they accelerate to the front of the class. Oh, I have my own thoughts on why the Khan Academy works, but the Khan Academy is working with MIT. Sal Khan is a graduate of MIT. We are going to be creating Khan-like videos. This is the future right here. How many people have seen MITx, where you can get an online engineering education from MIT, free for everyone, maybe a marginal fee. They just teamed up with Harvard. Check that out, because that's the future of education. The tools will be out there, and we could facilitate that. This is just a course, yada, yada, yada. And if you want to email me, you can harass me because I love this stuff.